This is John Howell Essential Cuts, your daily rundown of the best from today's show on 890 WLS.
Joe Biden made some remarks at the NATO Summit regarding our continued support for Ukraine.
The defense of freedom is not the work of a day or a year. It's the calling of our lifetime, of all time. We are steeled for the struggle ahead. Our unity will not falter, I promise you.
Zelensky had a stem winder as well.
Ukrainian delegation is bringing home significant security victory for the Ukraine, for our country, for our people, for our children. It opens for us absolutely new security opportunities.
This is a two-day high-stakes NATO summit in Lithuania. All eyes are on Biden earlier today as he met directly with Ukrainian President Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader said he had a good, powerful discussion with Biden that ran twice as long as scheduled. Let's get some elaboration on this story and some details from Faith Abubey, ABC News correspondent. She's been covering this all day long. Faith, I watched the prepared remarks. I saw the little scrum they had with the press. Is it safe to say that Biden seems supportive, but a bit oblique regarding Ukraine joining NATO in the timetable?
I think that's something the administration has been really clear about for a while now. President Biden has said, Ukraine is just not ready for a NATO membership just yet. And for several reasons. One of the reasons that the president has laid out is because of Article 5. Article 5 of NATO says that if you attack one member, you're attacking all members. And so if Ukraine, in the middle of this war with Russia, were to join NATO, that would mean that all of the NATO members would have to also go to war with Russia, which would be a direct conflict with Russia, which none of the members want at this point. And so they've said that they are committing to inviting Zelensky, inviting Ukraine to join NATO as soon as this conflict is over. But they would have to have all the allies agree on this, and also for Ukraine to actually meet some conditions yet to be determined before they can join. And so this is something that the president has been clear about. NATO also made that clear to President Zelensky. And of course, yesterday when it came out that NATO was not going to offer a firm timeline for Ukraine to join NATO, Zelensky was very upset. He was frustrated. He went on social media and slammed NATO, saying that they were weak for not giving him a firm timeline. He said that it was absurd. And then today we saw him soften his tone even more. And, after talking to President Biden and talking to other NATO members, he was satisfied that, he's getting the security guarantees that he needs to continue fighting on the front lines and fighting Russia and beating back these Russian invaders. And so for now, they're just going to talk about how NATO is united and supporting Ukraine and fighting back Russian aggression. And they'll talk about membership as a long-term goal.
Did you get the sense in watching this today that Zelensky seems to want to push Biden a little bit, but is very careful not to put him on the spot, especially in front of the press?
Yeah, I think constantly we've seen Zelensky walk this fine line between, asking for more on the battlefield, asking for more help from the U.S. and NATO allies, but also recognizing that, the U.S. and NATO has done a lot for his country. They've sent billions of dollars in military aid to that country just so they can have what they need, all the capabilities they need. Just recently, you saw the Biden administration approve those controversial cluster munitions that, a lot of the NATO members don't even use anymore. They've banned them. And so Zelensky has seen, the U.S. and other countries just stick their necks out for them. And so Zelensky, of course, wants more, but he's, basically walking this fine line to say, hey, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but, we want more. And that's what we've seen him do over and over again.
I noticed again, especially Zelensky's remarks at the end of the little press availability that they did sitting around the circle, that when cluster munitions came up, Zelensky clearly aimed his fire at Putin, saying, well, they used them from day one. Why shouldn't we be able to retaliate with the same munitions?
Right. And you also heard from members of the Biden administration who said, similar things like, Putin has been using those cluster munitions on Ukrainian land. And so they thought part of the decision, which the Biden administration said was a difficult decision for the president to actually allow these cluster munitions to head over to Ukraine. This was Ukraine. This is Ukraine about to use these cluster munitions on its own land. They don't want any danger to their own citizenship. In fact, they're fighting this war aggressively because they want to liberate, their people. And so they think that there have been security guarantees that have been made. There have been promises that Zelensky has made in terms of how they will use it and what will happen in terms of mining the mines afterwards to make sure everything is safe for civilians moving forward. And so they feel confident enough in the guarantees that they've gotten and the promises that they've gotten from Zelensky in Ukraine that, they feel at least temporarily they'll continue sending the cluster munitions maybe for several months before they ramp up production on other military weapons.
Faith Abubey, thank you for watching us all so we didn't have to. Have a great day, and we'll call on you again.
Thank you so much, John.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
But I wanted to talk to a legal expert about this regarding contracts, personal service contracts, moral turpitude clauses, and whether or not Dan Webb is going to take a lot of money out of Northwestern on behalf of his client, Pat Fitzgerald. So let's welcome Andrew Stoltmann, a leading Chicago attorney and a Northwestern law professor, back to WLS. Thank you, Andrew, for your time. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay, I'll be delicate because obviously you're at Northwestern, but we don't know what's in Pat Fitzgerald's contract. Okay, but in general, do you think the firing after an agreed suspension, publicized, could that possibly be a violation of Fitzgerald's employment contract?
Well, I think that's a good question, but I think it's kind of a two-part answer. First off, the initial firing was likely justified because the entire moral turpitude and the entire for-cause standard is pretty broad. And even though it's pretty clear that Fitzgerald didn't know about the hazing, Northwestern took special emphasis to say he should have known about it. Now, what I find really interesting is the second part of the equation, meaning they reached a settlement for that 2-week suspension. And the fact that Northwestern then reneged on it, that might be the best claim that he has, at least in a court of law, or in this case, likely arbitration, since most of these go to arbitration.
Okay, I want to get to that, but first, just to double down on kind of the first statement here. So can allegations alone, without any proof, rise to the level of fired with cause? And he's not an at-will employee, so is it different for somebody with a personal service contract as opposed to an at-will employee?
Yes, and the standard is likely laid out in the contract, which we, of course, haven't seen. But yes, I mean, mere allegations can be sufficient, assuming those allegations can be substantiated. If someone came forward and said he was sexually harassing me, and there was no backup to that, then that might be an issue. But it sounded like there were multiple people who said, yes, this hazing took place. Yes, it was problematic. So I think that's probably enough.
Who decides exactly the portal, how wide the portal is for firing if you use the moral turpitude clause?
Boy, that's that's really hard because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there's some things that are very clearly violative of that, right? Certain actions, certain conduct of coaches over the years. Now, look, this hazing situation, it's not exactly new in college football, right? Many coaches have actually been fired for this over the last 5 years or so. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is enough for a for-cause firing. I think it's going to be, but, it's certainly not clear.
If nothing new came to light in the short span of time between the suspension and the termination, wasn't the original, and you kind of touched on this, wasn't the original suspension considered a resolution between the parties? Done, turn the page, close the book?
Yes. And I think Dan Webb has really kind of centered in on that, and that might be his best argument. And I expect that to be the tip of the spear in the lawsuit against Northwestern.
This full investigation, which was conducted by the former Illinois Inspector General Maggie Hickey, that's not been made public. I don't know if it's going to be, but right now, can Webb, Fitzgerald, make a claim that they have a legal right to see it, to know what's in it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if Northwestern tries to play games with that in the course of discovery, it absolutely will be part of the record, and Webb and Fitzgerald will be able to get their hands on it, because that's obviously a really, really important piece of evidence in the entire case.
If Hickey said, and the president also corroborated this, that they found no credible evidence that Fitzgerald knew about the hazing, will that quote eventually help pay Dan Webb's inevitably large fee?
You know, at first blush, you say yes, and it certainly would seem like it. But, you know, in the same sense, he probably has a duty to know. Now, look, I didn't play college football, but everybody that I've spoken to have told me over the years that these college football coaches know everything that's going on in their program. And if not the head coach, some of the assistant coaches. So I think kind of the $64,000 question is, should he have known if he didn't know? And I think ultimately a judge or an arbitrator will make that decision.
Now, we don't know a lot of the details in these hazing incidents. And but Rick Morrissey, a fine columnist for the Sun-Times, went out of his way earlier this week to say this can't be compared to Penn State. Okay, so let's just say that for the record. However, does the hiring of Webb lead to any speculation in your mind that Fitzgerald could be trying to hedge against lawsuits, civil, or even a criminal liability? In other words, how legally exposed in the future would Coach Fitzgerald be?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, Dan Webb's one of the finest attorneys here in this, state, if not the country. I think it's really smart for him to have hired somebody like that. I don't think there's even a shred of doubt that there won't be any criminal liability, but hiring someone like Dan Webb really sends kind of a clean message to Northwestern that we are in this to win this. You owe me $42 million, the remaining amount of money left on my 10-year contract, and ante up now, and you can pay peacefully, or I can take it from you in a year. So I think it's a great move by Coach Fitz.
So 42, I know I would settle. I would probably settle for, I'd cut a deal right now.
That's a drop in the bucket for you, John. Come on.
I would say, how about $21 million, and we'll just turn the page, close the book, whatever. You know,
I think both sides have a vested interest in getting this thing settled, right? Northwestern is an amazing university. They value their reputation. Coach Fitz likely is going to want to work again. This has just a textbook example of a case that should settle, and hopefully it does.
Yeah, I agree. Really appreciate your analysis. Great having you on. Andrew Stoltmann, thank you, sir. Leading Chicago attorney, Northwestern law professor, and our go-to guy for all things legal. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Same. Thank you.
Take care.
This is John Howell Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
All right, to the health desk we go. From time to time, I like to play consumer advocate. The summer of 2023 is already proving to be an exceptionally bad summer and a dangerous summer for mosquitoes in the Chicago area. In the past 2 weeks, the North Shore Mosquito Abatement District has confirmed West Nile has been found in Glenview, Evanston, Lincolnwood, Northfield. According to the Lake County Health Department, West Nile has been confirmed in Bannockburn, Lake Villa, Vernon Hills. So I'm sure this is, we're reading about the North Shore right now, but I'm sure it's going to be true, if not already, throughout Chicagoland and the upper Midwest. Let's talk about how to protect yourself and your kids and de-mosquito your property. Janelle Iaccino, also known as the Bug Girl. She is the in-house scientist at Rose Pest Control. She joins us now here on WLS. Would you prefer Janelle or the Bug Girl?
It's up to you, John. Janelle is just fine with me.
So, Janelle, how does this year, the news that I just reported, how does it compare to last year and years 2-3 years ago? Is it far worse this year as far as the exposure possibly to West Nile?
You know, it's just a timing differentiation. Last year we had more rain by this time of the year. This year we had such a dry spell for the longest time. And then all of a sudden it was like it went from drought to floods. And the floods is what is causing this explosion in populations of bugs and especially mosquitoes. So the timing was a little bit off, but it's now that the populations are out there, the mosquito batches that have been tested by IDPH have been popping up with West Nile, and this is no surprise. This happens every year. Last year, I think DuPage County was the first report. That's where that came from. This year, it happened to be Evanston where the first case was.
What will West Nile do to you if you contract it?
Well, I think it's important to, not focus on the fact that, oh my gosh, if we get bitten, we're all going to die. But if you have a weakened immune system, you're especially at risk for this. And it will first give you the flu-like symptoms, but it can quickly escalate, and there's no cure for it. It'll just, it's a matter of support at that point. So I think really the key is just prevention and protecting your body, protecting yourself.
We always hear, about ticks and the fact that deer ticks can carry Lyme disease, but not all ticks, not all deer ticks carry Lyme disease. Do we know by percentage how many mosquitoes, ballpark percentage-wise, mosquitoes may be able to transmit West Nile?
I looked up some of the stats, and IDPH has a current ticker that's going on where you can see what has tested positive and where it's popping up. But there is one specific species of mosquitoes that carries West Nile virus, and it is one that we have all over this area, all over Illinois, all over Wisconsin, Indiana. It's the Culex species, which is different from the species that carries malaria, which I know has been all over the news too, popping up in Florida all of a sudden.
So what can I do to prevent, mosquitoes first and exposure to West Nile?
Yeah, so I think you have to think of it as a multi-pronged approach. Mosquitoes will breed whenever there's standing water. And so if you target the standing water areas in your yard, that will take care of where they're breeding. But then you also have to think about controlling the adult populations that are biting and laying those eggs. So being super diligent after it rains to tip over those pot saucers and, tip over any kind of kids' toys in the yard and get rid of any standing water is going to reduce your risk. And also, when you're outside, always wear repellent. You don't have to douse yourself in chemicals. There's a really great all-natural active ingredient that the EPA has approved that smells great too, oil of lemon eucalyptus. Always protect your body. And also consider a professional service for the yard because it's guaranteed 85% reduction in those populations, and that's going to knock down a huge risk factor.
I've utilized some of those services in the past. The guys show up maybe every week or 10 days or so, and I have to keep the dogs inside for a half hour after they've sprayed, but it's not inexpensive. Right.
And there's a lot of companies out there that'll offer, introductory teaser rates, but be careful with those. Really, the difference is choosing a company that scientifically knows what they're doing. I mean, I'll tell you, when Rose does a mosquito prevention service, before we do anything, we assess the yard. We look for those breeding sites and breeding zones. We talk to the homeowner. Where is your patio? Are you getting eaten a bit up, towards dusk? Or is it during the day? All of these things tell our professional where we need to treat and where we need to reduce those breeding zones. So it's not a haphazard lawn application treatment whatsoever. It's a very targeted approach that will end up being safer for the kids and pets in the yard, and it'll also be conscious of things like pollinators in the yard as well.
Oh, that's important. I don't want to kill off any bees that we have.
I know, yeah.
What can dogs contract West Nile?
Right, so this happens with a female infected mosquito. They'll typically bite birds, and the bird is how it then transmits to humans. So I suppose any warm-blooded animal that would be interacting outside with, the elements, that they're at risk as well.
Well, I appreciate the tips. Janelle Iaccino, also known as the Bug Girl, in-house scientist with our friends Rose Pest Control. How is the former congressman?
Oh, Bob is fantastic.
I bet you watching D.C. now and the circus that it's become, he's probably glad to be back at the family business.
Yeah, we definitely see a lot of him, and his son actually just started working for us too. Bobby took up a summer job with us, so the legacy continues.
I like that. I know you have a number of locations, but there's one that's right adjacent to the Edens, just north of Willow, and there's one of my favorite little diners there. It's in a green building. I think it's called the Northfield, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the Northfield Cafe. Love that place.
And it's right around the corner from you guys. So I've seen the former congressman's father at that diner previously. So,
many times.
Yep.
The chief loves to dine there.
The chief emeritus, the bug guy emeritus.
Love it.
Janelle, thanks so much for your time and your thoughts on this and your expertise. We appreciate it.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Extraordinarily sensitive. That's how a group of congressional Democrats describe the data that three major tax prep firms shared with Meta in recent years. And apparently there's a new report out that calls on the IRS, the Department of Justice, Federal Trade Commission, all to investigate this arrangement for some reason. This is the first I heard about this. What have I been missing? Let's start there with Andy Field, who's reporting on this in D.C. Andy, how long have we known about this potential problem?
Well, I think Meta and these companies have known about it for a while, but the congressional Democrats said that they've gotten information that indicated that all of what you just said is true, that H&R Block, Tax Act, and Tax Slayer has had some kind of relationship with Facebook. It was mostly about advertising, about making sure that their ads were reaching the right people. And that data came to Meta through what's called its pixel code, which the tax firms installed on their websites, and it gathered information about how to improve their own marketing campaigns. And in exchange, Meta was able to access the data to write targeted algorithms for its own users. Usually it's demographic stuff, like where do you live, how old you are, what are your likes and dislikes, so they can target the ads to the proper people. But apparently these companies basically open their vault to everything from your Social Security number to how much money you made, to how many deductions you had, how many dependents you had, all of this stuff, how much tax you own. And that's not kosher, as they say in the tax business. So these Democrats have exposed this, and they've asked the IRS, the Justice Department, and the Federal Trade Commission to investigate it. What's interesting is that these companies, for the most part, haven't denied they did this. H&R Block said today that it takes protecting client privacy very seriously. And they've taken steps to prevent sharing of information through the pixel coding, which doesn't say they didn't do it. It's just they're maybe not going to do it in the future. Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and now Threads, issued a statement saying it has been clear in its policies that advertisers should not send sensitive information about people through our business tools. Again, Meta not saying they didn't do it. They just said we told people not to do it.
It reminds me of banks that open accounts on your behalf without even alerting you that they've opened accounts on your behalf.
Right, and this is a growing issue. We saw this yesterday with Bank of America and in the past with Wells Fargo, that a lot of people just don't pay attention. They're not monitoring their credit reports. They're not really paying that much attention to their bank statements and looking at extra charges and looking through credit reports and all the other types of things that might indicate that there's some bad stuff going on that would affect you. So a lot of it has to do with our own diligence and making sure that we're kind of up to date on what these people are doing. But this stuff seems a little underhanded, and these Democratic members of Congress are asking the government to crack down on them, punish them, and hopefully in some way make restitution to the people whose information was compromised.
Why is this only Democrats that are concerned? It's not as if Republicans love Mark Zuckerberg.
No, that's true. I don't know the answer to that question other than they seem to have gotten their hands on this information first. I can't imagine that Republicans would not stand with them as well, because this really has nothing to do with the IRS at all. It's just the fact that your information that you give to the IRS, which you voluntarily gave to H&R Block, Tax Act, and Tax Slayer, got into the hands of Facebook in a way that you probably, you may have actually signed away that information, because there's so much fine print in these documents you sign when you sign up with these places, saying that they can share information. So they may not have done anything contractually illegally, but now that it's been exposed, it could definitely hurt their businesses for people who don't trust them.
So for people on the other side of the radio, my listeners, if you had an arrangement with H&R Block, Tax Act, and Tax Slayer, then you better check on that. And the leak came from the tax preparation firms, not from Facebook, correct?
It actually came up from The Markup, a nonprofit journalism outlet focusing on technology that initially reported about this data serving there, and then that somehow got into the hands of these congressmen who brought it to more public attention. So I don't think that these folks voluntarily gave this up. I think it was kind of exposed by some pretty good journalists who dug into this stuff.
Speaking of congressmen, did you get a chance to watch any of the FBI Director Wray appearance today?
A little bit. I mean, they brought him up there to be the human pinata for a couple of hours. Can you corroborate for me? I asked the same thing to our buddy Mike Emanuel an hour and a half ago. Do you think that Jerry Nadler and Jim Jordan ever socialized together? I mean, ever? I think that's pretty unlikely.
There seems to be a real dislike between those two.
Yeah, you don't see them at the same restaurants or the same parties. They never seem to go to the same gender reveal parties. None of that.
Yeah, if they are at the same restaurant, they're not stopping by the table.
No, that's true.
Wow, that was some high theater today. I mean, that was one of the more heated committees I've seen in a while. Heated hearing.
Well, what happens a lot, especially now that Republicans have control of these things, is they just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks, and they declare that there's something nefarious going on in the FBI when the FBI is under statute not allowed to reveal a lot of stuff that's going on in some of their investigations. So they say, well, you guys are obviously crooked because you won't reveal to us what's going on. And then, of course, the FBI director points them to the federal laws that many of them help write, saying, you said I can't do this.
Yeah, a lot of performative politics on both sides. Well, thanks, Andy. Much appreciated. I'm glad you brought us up to date on this. I guarantee there's a lot of people who are thinking, I've used one of those tax preparation firms. I'll have to look into this. Have a great afternoon.
If you're concerned, I would basically just call these places and say, hey, what's up with this?
Yeah. And they've responded, yeah, we did this, but look, we haven't done anything wrong. We did this on your behalf.
They didn't admit to doing it. They just said, we're working hard to make sure it doesn't happen.
All right, Andy, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Take care.
John Howell, Essential Cuts. Check back every weekday for another episode of John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.